The maintenance bay of the research vessel Meridian's Edge smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, which Jake Morrison had long ago decided was the official aroma of deep space exploration. He was currently wedged halfway inside a ventilation shaft, wrestling with a particularly stubborn atmospheric recycler that had been making sounds like a dying whale for the past 3 days. "Come on, you temperamental piece of space junk," he muttered, applying his favorite repair technique, percussive maintenance with a well-placed wrench strike. The machine wheezed, hiccuped, then resumed its normal humming. "There we go, see. You just needed some encouragement." The ship's intercom crackled to life, carrying Dr. Sarah Reynolds' voice throughout the vessel. "All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." Jake extracted himself from the shaft with considerably less grace than he'd entered it, his maintenance coveralls now decorated with dust, and what he hoped was just grease. He'd learned during his 5 years aboard the Meridian's Edge that situations in deep space usually meant one of 3 things. They were about to die, they discovered something that might kill them later, or the coffee machine was broken again. Given that he just fixed the atmospheric recycler, and the coffee had tasted particularly terrible that morning, he was hoping for option 2. The bridge was buzzing with nervous energy when he arrived, his toolkit clanking against his leg as he found a spot near the back of the assembled crew. Dr. Reynolds stood before the main view screen, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, which Jake had learned was a reliable indicator of how serious things were. Today's hair situation suggested they were somewhere between mildly catastrophic and start writing letters home. 3 hours ago, Reynolds began, our long-range sensors detected an artificial structure in orbit around Kepler 442b. Initial scans suggest it's a vessel of unknown origin, approximately 2 kilometers in length and completely inactive. No energy signatures, no response to our hails, nothing. The view screen flickered to life, displaying an image that made Jake's toolkit suddenly feel very inadequate. The alien ship looked like someone had taken a cathedral, a jellyfish, and a fever dream, then compressed them into something that hurt to look at directly. Its hull was a dark, iridescent material that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of observation, and organic-looking protrusions curved along its length like the ribs of some massive, sleeping creature. "Well," Jake said, breaking the stunned silence, "that's either the most beautiful thing I've ever seen or the most terrifying. I'm about 60-40 in favor of terrifying, but I reserve the right to adjust those odds based on whether it tries to eat us." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crew, and Reynolds shot him a look that was half grateful, half exasperated. "We're going to send a boarding party to investigate. Standard first contact protocols, full environmental suits, the works. And let me guess," Jake said, raising his hand, "you need someone dumb enough to volunteer to go poke the scary alien derelict with a stick." I was going to phrase it more diplomatically, but yes. Jake grinned. "Lucky for you, I happen to be an expert at poking things with sticks. Plus, if something goes wrong, I'm the only one here who knows how to fix the coffee machine, so you'll definitely come rescue me." 2 hours later, Jake found himself floating through the airlock connecting the Meridian's Edge to the alien vessel, accompanied by Dr. Reynolds, Security Chief Martinez, and Communications Officer Park. His environmental suit was loaded with every tool he thought might be useful, plus a few he'd brought along for what he optimistically called adaptive problem-solving, and everyone else called making things up as he went along. The alien ship's airlock had responded to their approach with disturbing eagerness, irising open like an enormous eye to welcome them aboard. The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior. The corridors seemed to pulse with a faint, organic rhythm, and the walls were covered in patterns that shifted and flowed when observed directly, but appeared static in peripheral vision. "Is it just me?" Jake whispered into his comm. Or does this place feel like we're walking through the digestive system of something really, really big? Jake, Reynolds hissed, maintain radio discipline. Right, sorry. I meant to say, this vessel displays fascinating biomechanical architecture that suggests an integration of organic and technological elements. But honestly, Doc, it still feels like we're about to become alien lunch. The corridor ahead branched into 3 passages, each marked with symbols that seemed to writhe and rearrange themselves when directly observed. Martinez was consulting his scanner, frowning at the readings. Energy signatures are stronger down the central passage, he reported. Whatever's powering this thing is in that direction. Or whoever, Park added quietly. They followed the central corridor deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing strangely in the alien atmosphere. The walls began to glow more brightly as they progressed, and Jake noticed that the organic patterns were becoming more complex, almost like neural networks branching and connecting in impossible configurations. "Hey, Doc," he said, tapping one of the glowing nodes with his scanner. "You don't suppose this whole ship is actually alive, do you? Because if it is, I'm pretty sure we're currently walking through its brain, which explains why I feel like I'm about to have a very awkward conversation." Before Reynolds could respond, the corridor opened into a vast chamber that made them all stop in their tracks. The space was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium, with a domed ceiling that displayed what appeared to be star charts of impossible complexity. But dominating the center of the chamber was a crystalline structure that pulsed with inner light, and suspended within it was a figure that was unmistakably humanoid. "Well," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think we just found the owner." The figure was female, or at least appeared to be, with features that were hauntingly beautiful and almost human. Almost, but not quite. Her ears were the giveaway, long and elegantly pointed, sweeping back from her head like delicate blades. Her skin had a faint luminescence, and her hair floated around her as if suspended in liquid rather than gas. She appeared to be sleeping, or in some form of stasis, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched the ship's pulse. "Stasis pod," Martinez said, scanning the structure with his instruments. "Biometric readings are, well, they're reading as humanoid, but there are some significant variations. Heart rate is present but extremely slow. Brain activity suggests deep hibernation." "Should we wake her up?" Park asked. Jake looked at the sleeping figure, then at the vast, obviously advanced ship surrounding them, then back at his toolkit. "You know, in every movie I've ever seen, waking up the mysterious alien in the crystal pod is usually when things go from interesting archaeological discovery to why is everything trying to kill us? But then again, it seems rude to just stand here staring at her while she sleeps." As if responding to his words, the crystalline structure began to pulse more rapidly, its light shifting from blue to amber to a brilliant white. The figure's eyes opened suddenly, revealing irises that blazed like twin stars, and her gaze fixed immediately on the 4 humans standing before her stasis chamber. "Oh," Jake said, taking an involuntary step backward as cracks appeared in the crystal around the awakening figure. "I think I just answered my own question about whether we should wake her up. The answer appears to be too late to worry about it now." The chamber exploded outward in a shower of crystalline fragments that rang like bells as they struck the floor. The alien woman stepped out of the wreckage with fluid grace, her presence filling the enormous space with an almost tangible authority. When she spoke, her voice seemed to resonate through their bones rather than their ears. "You dare disturb my slumber, primitive beings." Jake looked at his companions, then back at the clearly powerful and possibly hostile alien queen, who had just made what sounded like a very unfriendly opening statement. He cleared his throat. "Well, technically we knocked first, but your doorbell seems to be broken." The alien queen, who had introduced herself as Zarathis with the kind of flourish that suggested she expected orchestral accompaniment, had been explaining the fall of her civilization for the better part of an hour. Jake was starting to suspect that immortal beings had a very different relationship with the concept of getting to the point. The Velter dynasty ruled 17 star systems for over 3 millennia, she continued, pacing across what had apparently materialized as a throne room while they weren't looking. The ship's interior seemed to shift and change according to her mood, which Jake found either impressively advanced or deeply concerning. We were masters of biomechanical fusion, creators of living starships, guardians of the cosmic order. "That's right," Jake said, adjusting his position where he was currently suspended upside down above what Zarathus had cheerfully described as a minor assessment pit. The creatures below him looked like a cross between piranhas and disco balls, their crystalline teeth catching and reflecting light in dizzying patterns as they snapped hungrily at the air. And now you're the last one left, sleeping in a crystal egg until some hapless human stumbled across your ship. Classic tragic backstory. Very sympathetic. Question though, is the whole dangling us over the pit of sparkly death thing really necessary for this conversation? Zarathus paused in her pacing, her star-bright eyes focusing on him with what might have been amusement. You are being tested, human. Your species' worthiness must be determined before I decide whether to offer alliance or simply use you as suitable vessels for my people's rebirth. Vessels, Dr. Reynolds managed to croak from her own inverted position. What exactly do you mean by vessels? Oh, you know, Jake said conversationally, the usual alien queen stuff. Probably involves either mind control, body snatching, or turning us into some kind of hybrid offspring. Maybe all three if she's feeling ambitious. He looked down at the snapping disco piranhas. Though personally, I'm starting to think the pit might be the more pleasant option. Your flippancy is unexpected, Zarathus said, and Jake noticed that her imperious tone had wavered slightly. Most species cower before the majesty of Velter authority. Yeah, well, I've been yelled at by drill sergeants and ship captains. You're definitely more impressive than either of them. Love what you've done with the ears. By the way, very elegant. But the basic dynamic is pretty familiar. Angry authority figure, impossible situation, me making inappropriate jokes to cope with stress. It's like Tuesday for me. The Queen's perfectly composed expression flickered, revealing something that might have been confusion. You compare me to your military instructors. Only in the best possible way, Jake assured her. You've got better posture than Sergeant Williams, and your ship is definitely more interesting than the asterisk Meridian's Edge asterisk. Plus, the whole glowing eyes thing is a nice touch, very intimidating, really sells the cosmic authority bit. Martinez, dangling nearby, managed to whisper, Morrison, what are you doing? Honestly, I have no idea, Jake whispered back. But she seems less murdery when I talk, so I'm going with it. Zarathus had resumed her pacing, but Jake noticed she kept glancing in his direction. The first test, she announced, requires you to solve the paradox of the infinite mirror. Failure means you feed my children below. A holographic projection appeared in front of each suspended human, a complex geometric puzzle that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that made Jake's eyes water. Reynolds immediately began working through the mathematical implications, while Martinez and Park struggled with the spatial relationships. Jake looked at his puzzle, then at the disco piranhas, then back at the puzzle. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that this is one of those tests where the obvious solution is wrong. The clever solution is a trap, and the actual answer involves thinking sideways at the whole problem. Explain, Zarathus commanded, though she'd stopped pacing to listen. Well, it's called the paradox of the infinite mirror, right? So we're looking at reflections reflecting reflections, creating an endless loop. But here's the thing about infinite loops. They only work if you keep feeding them input. The solution isn't to solve the puzzle, it's to stop participating in it. Jake closed his eyes and let his hands fall to his sides, ignoring the holographic display entirely. I refuse to play. The projection flickered and disappeared. Zarathus stared at him for a long moment, then made a gesture that caused the restraints holding him to release. He dropped a few feet before a platform materialized beneath him, putting him at eye level with the alien queen. "Interesting," she said. "You chose wisdom over cleverness." "I chose being lazy over working hard," Jake corrected. "But if you want to call it wisdom, I'm not going to argue with someone who has a pet piranha collection." For the first time since awakening, Zarathus almost smiled. Almost. The others may continue their attempts. 20 minutes later, after Reynolds had brilliantly solved her puzzle through advanced mathematics, Martinez had conquered his through tactical thinking, and Park had approached hers with linguistic analysis. All four humans found themselves standing on solid ground again. The throne room had reconfigured itself. Jake had been hammering on the ship's neural core for exactly 17 minutes when the distress signal arrived. He knew this because the biomechanical brain he was currently rewiring had helpfully displayed a countdown timer, apparently finding his percussive maintenance technique either fascinating or deeply offensive. "There," he said, giving one final tap to what looked like a crystalline nerve cluster. "Now stop trying to murder my friends and start acting like a proper starship instead of a paranoid goldfish." The AI's voice resonated through the chamber, sounding distinctly sulky. "Your crude intervention has restored primary command protocols. Queen Zarathus's authority is acknowledged. See, you just needed some encouragement. Like a really complicated cat that's been alone too long." Jake wiped his hands on his coveralls and started back toward the upper levels. "Now let's go see if Her Majesty has forgiven me for calling her throne compensatory." He found the rest of the group in what had become a combination bridge and war room, with Zarathus standing before a three-dimensional tactical display that made Jake's head hurt to look at directly. The hologram showed a star system in distress, multiple red indicators flashing around what appeared to be a human colony. "The Devourers," Zarathus was explaining to Reynolds and the others. "Machine intelligences that consume organic matter to fuel their expansion. They destroyed my empire, and now they threaten your colony on Kepler 438b. "How many people?" Martinez asked grimly. "Approximately 50,000, the ship's AI responded, its tone now properly respectful toward its queen. "Colony designation New Brisbane. Current estimated survival time under Devourer assault: 14 hours, 27 minutes. Jake whistled low. "That's a lot of people about to become robot food." He looked at the tactical display, noting the swarm of mechanical ships descending on the colony. "Please tell me you've got some kind of super weapon that can turn those things into scrap metal." Zarathus's expression was grim. "The Velter possessed great power, but the Devourers adapted to our weapons over the course of our war. Brute force alone will not suffice." "But you're going anyway," Jake said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen that look before, the expression of someone who'd lost everything once and refused to let it happen again, even to strangers. "I am," she confirmed, "though I cannot ask humans to." "Oh, you're not asking," Jake interrupted, already checking his toolkit. "I'm volunteering. Those are my people getting turned into robot snacks, and I've got a personal policy against letting my species get extinct on my watch." Reynolds stepped forward. "Jake, this isn't a maintenance emergency. These are hostile aliens with technology beyond our understanding. Doc, I just fixed a living spaceship by hitting it with a wrench until it agreed to be reasonable. At this point, I'm pretty sure my understanding of technology has evolved beyond traditional boundaries." He grinned at Zarathus. "Plus, Her Majesty is going to need someone to watch her back, and I'm the only one here stupid enough to think this sounds like fun." The alien queen studied him for a long moment, and Jake noticed something shift in her star-bright eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there during their earlier testing. "You would risk your life for people you have never met." "Lady, I once spent 6 hours inside a plasma conduit that was actively trying to electrocute me just to save the ship's movie collection. 50,000 strangers definitely qualifies for rescue duty." He paused. Though I should probably warn you, I don't actually speak alien super language, so if we need to do any sneaking around, my contribution to stealth is going to be limited to trying not to trip over things too loudly. Zarathis made a gesture, and a small crystalline device materialized in her palm. This translator will allow you to understand devourer communications and render your words as ancient Velter poetry, which should confuse their tactical algorithms sufficiently to aid in infiltration. Jake accepted the device, which immediately bonded to his ear with a sensation like being licked by a very small, very technical cat. Ancient poetry, so my jokes are going to come out sounding like Shakespeare. More like ceremonial death songs, actually. Even better, nothing says don't take this human seriously, like accidentally composing epic verse about the temperature of their coffee. Jake clipped his toolkit to his belt and checked his sidearm. So what's the plan? Sneak in, plant some explosives, sneak out, and hope we blow up enough robots to give the colonists time to evacuate. The Devourer command ship coordinates their entire fleet through a central processing node, Zarathis explained, manipulating the holographic display to show the massive vessel at the center of the enemy formation. If we can infiltrate it and introduce a virus into their network, we can turn their own coordination systems against them. A virus, right? Jake nodded sagely. Please tell me this isn't one of those plans where the virus is actually you, and introducing it involves some kind of noble sacrifice that leaves me explaining to my crew why I came back without the immortal alien queen. For the first time since he'd met her, Zarathis actually smiled, a real expression that transformed her entire face from regally beautiful to something far more human. The virus is a computational construct, not a biological one, though I appreciate your concern for my continued existence. Good, because I've gotten attached to having you around to explain things and look dramatically imposing. It would be a shame to lose that. Jake realized what he'd just said and felt his cheeks warm slightly. I mean, you know, from a practical standpoint, very convenient having someone who can talk to alien computers and make furniture appear out of thin air. The smile widened slightly, and Jake noticed that Zarathis's ears had taken on a faint luminescent glow. Indeed, your practical contributions have also proven surprisingly valuable. 2 hours later, Jake found himself crammed into a maintenance shaft aboard the Devourer command ship, following Zarathis through a maze of conduits and access ways that seemed designed by someone with a deep hatred of proper ergonomics. The ship's interior was all harsh angles and exposed circuitry, completely lacking the organic elegance of Velter technology. I hate to be the one to point this out, he whispered into his comm, but this infiltration plan has one tiny flaw. Specifically, you're about 2 meters tall, glowing like a small star, and radiating enough royal authority to set off every sensor in 3 star systems. Not exactly subtle. Velter royalty does not skulk, came her dignified response from ahead of him. Right, which is why we're currently crawling through alien ductwork like a pair of very lost janitors. Your Majesty, I love the confidence, but maybe consider that sometimes the most royal thing you can do is successfully not get shot by robots. They emerged from the maintenance shaft into what appeared to be a server room, banks of quantum processors humming with malevolent efficiency. Jake pulled out his scanner and immediately regretted it. The device's readings were jumping around like a caffeinated squirrel. The central node should be 3 levels up, Zarathis said, consulting a holographic map that had appeared around her wrist. We must reach it before. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship, and Jake heard the distinctive whine of charging weapon systems. Before they noticed us, he finished. Right. Any chance your virus upload is the kind of thing that works really, really fast. The integration process requires approximately 4 minutes of uninterrupted connection to the central node. 4 minutes? In the middle of a ship full of angry robots that now know we're here. Jake checked his sidearm and mentally inventoried his toolkit. You know what? I've had worse Tuesday afternoons. They fought their way up through 3 levels of increasingly hostile machinery, with Zarathus demonstrating that Velter royalty apparently came with built-in weapon systems that turned devourers into very expensive scrap metal. Jake contributed by applying percussive maintenance to anything that looked important, a technique that proved surprisingly effective against machines that had apparently never encountered repair work as a form of warfare. The central node, Zarathus announced as they burst into the command ship's core chamber. The space was dominated by a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with data flows, surrounded by defensive systems that immediately began tracking their movement. Right, Jake said, diving behind a console as energy blasts started filling the air around them. Here's a crazy idea. What if you start your virus upload thingy, and I see how many robots I can annoy with my wrench collection? Jake, there are too many of them. You cannot possibly. Your Majesty, I spent 2 years keeping a deep space mining platform operational with nothing but spare parts and sheer bloody-mindedness. Trust me, I can be very annoying when I put my mind to it. He was already moving, his toolkit transforming into an improvised arsenal as he applied years of maintenance experience to the novel problem of combat engineering. Sonic drivers became disruption weapons, plasma cutters turned into improvised grenades, and his favorite wrench proved remarkably effective at convincing devourer units to stop functioning properly. The defensive systems were converging on his position when he heard Zarathus cry out. He turned to see her surrounded by 3 massive devourer units, their weapons charging for what would definitely be a killing blow. Jake didn't think. He simply moved, throwing himself between the alien queen and the attacking machines. The energy blast caught him full in the chest, sending him flying backward to crash against the chamber's wall. His toolkit scattered across the floor as he slumped down, his vision blurring. Why? Zarathus whispered, kneeling beside him as her own weapons finished destroying the remaining devourers. Her hands were glowing with healing energy, but Jake could tell from her expression that his injuries were severe. He managed a weak smile, tasting copper in his mouth. Because someone has to care about the last queen in the universe, he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of her virus completing its upload. And I figured it might as well be the guy with the best jokes. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Zarathus's face above him, her star-bright eyes filled with an emotion he'd never expected to see there, something that looked remarkably like love. Jake woke up to the sound of someone arguing with a computer in what sounded like musical mathematics. He tried to sit up, and immediately discovered that his chest felt like he'd been used as a crash test dummy for an especially vindictive spacecraft. "Easy, human," came Zarathus's voice from somewhere to his left. "The bioregenerative matrix is still repairing your more catastrophic injuries." "Catastrophic," Jake croaked, his voice sounding like he'd been gargling gravel. "That's a cheerful way to put it. On a scale of 1 to should probably start writing a will. How catastrophic are we talking? You took a direct hit from a devourer primary weapon. By all rights, you should have been reduced to your component atoms." Her tone was carefully controlled, but Jake could hear something underneath it, relief mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify. Velter medical technology is extensive. Jake managed to turn his head enough to see her sitting in a chair, beside what appeared to be a medical bay straight out of a science fiction fever dream. Crystalline matrices hummed around his body, and he could feel tiny repair drones working under his skin like industrious ants. Zarathus looked exhausted, her usual regal composure replaced by something far more human. "How long was I out?" 37 hours. The colony evacuation was completed successfully. Your virus worked exactly as designed. The Devourer fleet has been repurposed. A slight smile crossed her features. They are currently constructing recreational facilities for the colonists while composing apologetic poetry about their previous behavior. Apologetic poetry. Jake laughed, then immediately regretted it as his ribs protested. Please tell me someone recorded that. I want to hear killer robots explaining themselves in haiku form. The translation matrix you were using had some interesting side effects on their communication protocols, Zarathus admitted. Your tendency toward humor apparently created cascading linguistic loops in their tactical systems. Jake grinned despite the pain. So I literally joke-bombed them into submission. That's definitely going on my resume under unique qualifications. The medical bay fell quiet except for the soft humming of the healing matrices. Jake noticed that Zarathus was still in the same chair, and from the way her hair was disheveled and her royal robes were wrinkled, he suspected she'd been there the entire time he was unconscious. You didn't have to stay, he said softly. Where else would I be? The response was immediate, almost defensive, and Jake saw a flush of color rise in her cheeks that made her ears glow faintly. You nearly died protecting me. The least I could do was ensure your recovery proceeded without complications. Your Majesty, are you telling me that the last queen of a galactic empire spent a day and a half playing nurse to a maintenance worker because you felt guilty? I am telling you nothing of the sort, she said primly, but her eyes were bright with something that looked suspiciously like unshed tears. I am merely ensuring that my ally receives proper medical attention. Ally, Jake repeated, testing the word. Is that what we're calling it? Before she could respond, the medical bay's door chimed and admitted Dr. Reynolds, Martinez, and Park, all looking relieved to see Jake conscious and talking. Reynolds immediately began fussing over his medical readouts, while Jake had been hammering on the ship's neural core for exactly 17 minutes when the distress signal arrived. He knew this because the biomechanical brain he was currently rewiring had helpfully displayed a countdown timer, apparently finding his percussive maintenance technique either fascinating or deeply offensive. There, he said, giving one final tap to what looked like a crystalline nerve cluster. Now stop trying to murder my friends and start acting like a proper starship instead of a paranoid goldfish. The AI's voice resonated through the chamber, sounding distinctly sulky. Your crude intervention has restored primary command protocols. Queen Zarathus's authority is acknowledged. See, you just needed some encouragement. Like a really complicated cat that's been alone too long. Jake wiped his hands on his coveralls and started back toward the upper levels. Now let's go see if Her Majesty has forgiven me for calling her throne compensatory. He found the rest of the group in what had become a combination bridge and war room, with Zarathus standing before a three-dimensional tactical display that made Jake's head hurt to look at directly. The hologram showed a star system in distress, multiple red indicators flashing